I am here today with a super inspiring member of the epilepsy community, and we're going to be discussing the Steps Towards Zero movement, which is a way to empower people living with epilepsy to rethink or reassess their treatment plan, talk to their doctors, have those tough conversations to get where we want to be. And I think it's really important to point out in the top of this that steps towards zero and zero seizures means something different to everyone. Everyone has a different type of epilepsy, and everyone has a different meaning for zero seizures. It could be a year, it could be a week, it could be a month, it could be an hour, it could be a day. But that's what we're trying to do, is just figure out what that goal is for you. And hopefully by having these conversations, it just helps you figure that out. Our guest today is going to talk about his journey in managing seizures and his epilepsy, mental health, family relationships, and finding the right treatment plan, all while living a super active lifestyle. Jared, thank you so much for being here. You're an avid surfer, a digital marketer, an epilepsy advocate, and I was just wondering if you could tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, honestly, Landis, it's an honor to be with you here. We've talked before, but seeing your story is ever inspiring to me as well, and so I'm very excited to be here and talk with you. My name's Jared Muscat. I think that's pretty well established, but I'm 33. I was diagnosed with epilepsy at the age of 17 while on my way to college, which was quite the introduction to college. Since that time, I've gone through hundreds of seizures that at some point directed me towards finding a new path for my treatment plan, and eventually getting about a cubic centimeter of my brain removed to help find a controlled seizure plan. And I'm now running just over a year seizure free. Before that, it had been about 2 years, so that was a slight hiccup. But again, epilepsy is different for everyone. There's different treatment plans, different ideals of life, and I'm all about and very passionate about trying to empower, enable, and be a support beam for this great warrior community and the families around them.
And I think I can speak on behalf of everyone that we are very appreciative of that. So I think we just want to dive right in here, and I want to talk about, like there's the now Jared, right? Who's a year seizure free, who lives an active life, working full time. You are a husband, you're a dad, and you do quite a bit of surfing on top of all of that. But you mentioned, you were diagnosed on your way to college, which is such an interesting is probably the wrong adjective, but just a unique story. And I was wondering if you could just tell me a little bit about your early epilepsy journey, what that looked like before.
Yeah, I would say interesting is appropriate, definitely unique in its way, but a dear friend of mine had actually been diagnosed with epilepsy about 6 months before the end of that school year. And as I was driving down, I lived in the Bay Area at the time, and I was on my way to UC San Diego. And on the drive down, I wanted to stop by and say hello and provide some support, because she was in the hospital for a video EEG session. And that was back in the day of Blockbuster. And so I'd gone over there and picked up all the movies I could to help her stay up late so they could try to see what was happening, and biked back home at about 3 in the morning, and a couple hours later awoke to a room full of paramedics, EMT, my mom looking like she'd just seen me get hit by a bus, my cousin the same way. And shortly thereafter, I went into they took me to the hospital. I had another seizure, and I was basically diagnosed on the spot.
Wow.
And yeah, it was
the irony of that, again, just the uniqueness of all of this is like the irony that, you're visiting a friend who's doing an EEG, which then prompts you to have a seizure, which is, it's just like, it's just a little, the fate in there is pretty crazy.
Yeah, and I hadn't heard of epilepsy until she had been diagnosed, and so
Wow.
it was somewhat new to me. During my first meeting with my first neurologist, she was going through all the check marks to learn about my life. She asked, are you an active person? It's important to have a healthy lifestyle. And I told her very immediately, yeah, I surf every day. I'm about to go to a school just above one of the better waves in San Diego, so I'm going to be surfing a lot more. And she immediately replied, no, surfing with epilepsy is very dangerous. You could drown, and so no, you need to stop surfing. And I responded, well, you told me I need to be as stress-free as possible, and if you want me stress-free, I can't be salt-free. She continued to tell me, I know you're going to college, and so it'd be great that you don't drink alcohol. And I told her, you know, I've only done it once or twice. I hate the taste of every option, and so I take pride in saying no to that so I can wake up early for my surfs in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
She obviously looked at me a little cross-eyed, but my mom and my dad were nearby and said, he is who he is, and he needs to be a surfer. And so that
And
was the beginning.
I just want to, that's just so amazing that, you know, that if you want me to be stress free, I can't be salt free. And I think what you did there is so inspiring because we are told from the get go the things that, you know, we can't do that are too dangerous. But I love that you just took ownership and you said, this is what I need, you know, and that can vary from just like epilepsy varies from person to person, our passions vary from person to person, right?
Yeah, a lot of people call it brave, and I do find a certain portion of that to be brave, but I would also call it relatively naive bravery. Bravo. Again, I'd just been introduced to epilepsy 6 months prior, and although it was one of my dear friends, she lived 6+ hours away from me, and so I check in with her. We talk about it from time to time, but I didn't quite understand what the road ahead was, and what I did
Yeah.
understand was what surfing meant to me. I was trying to be a professional, dreaming really, and at the end of the day, there was no way I found it possible to take that out of my life.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I stand, and I say that now today, understanding how selfish of a sport surfing is. It's something that you do for yourself, not your friends. Yes, there's a great community. Most of my closest friends are surfers, but you don't go ride that wave for your friend or for your wife or for your son. And even if your friend's in the lineup with you, you're going to try to conspire that you're getting the better wave. So I do
Well,
understand
and
the nature of it.
yeah, I mean, I appreciate how you say that. You say it's a selfish sport because you say, "Oh, I'm not doing this for my wife. I'm not doing this for my son." And what I wanted to ask you was how you feel like epilepsy has affected your relationships. You know, from your immediate family to your son, your wife, coworkers, which I know is a very broad question. But how do you feel like that the epilepsy has kind of impacted each of these avenues?
Yeah, you know, it's been different for it all. Starting with my original approach and the effect it had on my immediate family. At first, I didn't want it to be known too much amongst
Mm-hmm.
friends or faculty of the college or anything of that nature. And my parents, they were pretty empowering for the most part. They really wanted to let me take the leads, but there was also a certain amount of types of restrictions or check-ins. I would let them know I had a seizure, and a text message would come back with how long, what do you feel like now, et cetera, et cetera. And
Mm-hmm.
I would say, I'll get to you when I don't feel like I got hit by a truck. But
Right.
right now,
Yeah.
the last thing I want to think about is what happened 30 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And
And sometimes you can't even communicate at that point.
you know, after that 10-day coma, which was triggered because of lack of consistency in my treatment, um, my parents set a strict standard that I had to text them at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. to certify medication was taken. And we had a lengthy
Wow.
conversation of me trying to say no to that. And they said at the end of the day, you're doing that. And I remember that time period where I'd in the morning sometimes because I was back in college. So I didn't necessarily always have to go to school or work by 9 a.m. I'd be going
Right.
for a the optimal tide, and I'd bring my pillbox to the beach, and I'd, have my watch on me and look to make sure, all right, 8:55, got to get away in the next minute or so, get to the sand, send that text, take that medication. And
Mm.
over time, the faith became understood, and we got to wean off of that communication. And now as a father, um, I very much more understand and can comprehend that fear that was built in them, that stress that was built into them because of it,
Sure.
and don't hold it against them in any way, shape, or form. That was before iPhones, with all the alarm options and ways to make some of that communication easier. And over time,
Yeah.
we went through our ups and downs, and how the epilepsy communication went between the two of us. When I started dating my wife so long ago, I immediately told her about it and made sure she was aware. Yeah. And I would, there's also the challenge of how to inform your employers. When I got my first professional job, I remember having a lengthy conversation with my father about whether or not to tell them, whether or not to prepare the
Yeah.
team. And we, collaborated together to think it wasn't the best idea for fear of the way they might react, fear of
Yeah.
the possible implications. And I look back on that, and that was not the right decision we made. I had a seizure about part of the reason we made the decision was, at the time, almost all my seizures were nocturnal, but that was
Mm.
before the stresses of the professional life. And about six
Yeah.
months into my career, I had a seizure in the office and awoke to a room filled of EMT and coworkers with an ambulance waiting for me, and had to do
Mm.
my best to communicate, hey, no need, that wasn't a bad one. Um, and right thereafter, I took it as, all right, whenever my employers need to know about this, my employers need to know seizure first aid. Any employer that would say no to me about epilepsy isn't an employer worth working for. And over
Mm-hmm.
time, through each of my next employers, I did say it right off the bat. I had the team seizure first aid trained and ready to understand, hey, this might happen. And sorry if it does. I know it's not fun for anyone involved, but this is how I would need you to help me through the
Mm-hmm.
process. And now
That's really amazing too, especially that everyone was seizure trained, you know. And I just think, because that can be really scary, right? To bring all this attention to the thing that you struggle with. But it's like, this is actually not just benefiting me, this is benefiting you and future people who work here, or people who might work there who have epilepsy but have been too afraid to share it themselves.
yeah, the more communication, it usually provides more support. It provides more personal empowerment.
Oh,
Um,
that's
there's
good. The more communication, the more support, and the more personal empowerment. That is, I think we have our Oprah quote of
Yeah,
of the interview.
but I don't say it lightly. Where it isn't. When you and I have spoken in the past, we both talk about how it's a certain stress to start that communication. It's a
Yes,
slight fear about starting that communication.
totally,
You have
totally.
epilepsy if you don't start it until they see a seizure. I've been
Mm,
fortunate where I've never seen one. Yes, I've experienced them, but I can't seeing the faces of those around me who have seen them, and I can't imagine what that would look like, and the fear that would strike on you, wanting to be there to help as much as possible when there isn't too much help you could directly provide other than lay to the side, nothing in the mouth.
right.
Yeah, it's not like when my son trips and gets a scrape on his knee and some kisses make it better. um,
If
you know,
only, wouldn't that be lovely?
that would be the best. But yeah, I do understand that, and part of the reason I worked to find the treatment plan that I did was my wife and we'd been married a couple years, and we'd started to talk about children, and and we came together to say these are not controlled enough to start a family yet. So let's take some more action in how we could possibly get to that level. And my son's 3.5 years old. He's never seen one, but he does see me take my medication 9 a.m., 9 p.m. He'll always encourage it. I don't think he understands exact 100% why. He is a smart and baseball skilled little man, but
Yes,
day,
I've seen the Insta stories. He's a very good baseball player.
that's my goal in life right there. But yeah, I do try to communicate with him as much as possible about it, and at some point he'll be of the age where we can talk about it in more detail, and he would be someone that would be prepared if it was ever needed. But also try to make sure he doesn't feel the stress that my parents or my wife or my brother or my close friends have when it's happened around them.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the like acceptance, right, of our epilepsy is that it is going to be stressful for other people around us, but these are the people that love us and that care about us and that are happy to help, you know.
Yeah,
But I think like there's always this fear, and this goes to family and friends, and also like to past conversations about work, of being the burden, right? Of being the person that like, oh, like I just don't want to be a burden. And I think, so much of the work is just about reframing that and, looking at it like, well, what would I do if it were my friend, my coworker, my wife, my husband? And I think it's like trying to remember this is just part of our human experience. And I know that's something I've definitely had to work on too, even just reaching out for help and remembering that people want to help
yeah,
is,
fault we have epilepsy. That was
yeah,
just
right.
what happened. So it's a consistent balancing act that you're going to have to play in many different ways. And such things as encouraging you, be it your wife, your partner, your mother and father, whoever, to go find their own support for it, so that their
Yes,
stress and their fears can be diminished as much as possible, and not brought to you, but um,
absolutely.
still taken care of. Um, we've talked about it, and I talk about it with everyone who reaches out to me. You need to create a team. Yes, there's someone who's going to deal with it the worst, but there needs to be a relatively team organized process where stress is shared, fear is shared, in whatever way feels best. But going back to that word we keep mentioning of empowerment, the person with epilepsy needs to be empowered in each and every way possible, no, with given their condition. But that person at the end of the day should be the leader of themselves.
Yes.
And so
Oh, I love that. Yes. And the idea of team too, because like we need to build our own team, but then the people around us also need to build their team. Like you said, someone, uh, in our lives and our loved ones, rather than putting the stress back on us, they need to have their team of that they can go to and be like, this, I'm really stressed about, my friend with epilepsy, and I just need to talk to someone about it. It's kind of like we all have to have our own teams, and then people with epilepsy really need to have a team. It's kind
100%.
of like everyone's looking for balance in life, right? That's like the whole thing is like every person, regardless of your health status, is like we're all trying to find balance. But I feel like it keeps coming back to with epilepsy, things are more enhanced. Like we really need a team, we really need balance because our stakes are just a little bit higher.
100%. A seizure is traumatic for the person who endures it, but it's traumatic for anyone who had to watch it.
It's like, okay, this is stressful for everyone involved. Here's my team. You make your team. We're all on the same team, but it's
Yeah,
still an individual thing. And I wanted to ask you, this kind of leads into what I wanted to ask you, which is about just the toll epilepsy can take on our mental health. Because I think it's no secret to people with epilepsy that, just accepting the diagnosis, managing seizures, figuring out treatment options, all of those things can weigh on us. And is there a time or an experience that you would be okay sharing that you felt like you really struggled with the mental health aspect during your epilepsy journey?
Yeah, I mean, going through when I found out about the focal cortical dysplasia, this was I was home alone. My wife was on a work trip, and the medical record that comes through the MyChart app popped up about my recent MRIs, and it showed focal cortical dysplasia. And there I did a quick Google search, and I heard this thing, and then another Google search brought me that thing, and on and on.
Yeah.
And within about a 15-minute period or so, I saw brain surgery, and I was thinking to myself, holy cannoli, like I have absolutely I've never even heard of brain surgery about epilepsy. I'm
Mhm.
gonna have to get worked on. What the heck am I gonna do? And what I did is I called a dear family friend who'd recently gone through a surgery of her own, not a brain surgery, but just as a support beam. I had a neurologist appointment just a couple days later, and I said, hey, can you please come with me? I'm gonna write out my questions. My wife and I will talk tonight when our time zones align, but I'm
Mhm.
going to need someone by my side, as the doctor tells me himself what the possible path forward is. And it's definitely something, going back to you don't want it to be your identity.
Yep.
You try to cast it to the side in whichever way possible.
Mhm.
I think, I definitely have done my fair share of that, and it's had its after effects. And so that's why, going back to team and empowerment, trying to be more upfront with yourself, more forward thinking, not just casting it to the side every time, but
Yeah.
understanding it's a long process.
Yeah, and I think that's so true. Like it is just a long process, which is frustrating because especially in this day and age, we like things done like this, you know.
Yeah.
And and even though we're doing the right things, like going to therapy, and like I started seeing a neuropsychologist, which really helped me because she helped explain what was happening in my brain with seizures, why the depression starts, just all these things to help me and then it really I was like, oh yeah, I guess epilepsy's had you know quite an effect on a lot of different lenses in my life. And it sometimes does take, like you said, the objective perspective and a professional to help us not only recognize it, but then figure out those coping mechanisms. And rather than just surviving the thing, understanding it and working with it, because we just try and live, right? We try and live like seizure free moments. Like, I'm not having a seizure now, I'm just going to live it and forget about, forget about that thing that might happen.
I mean, you've mentioned, and I don't think I mentioned, but I work as a brand marketer. I work in marketing my entire career, and in marketing, you review the past. You try to think 2 days ahead, 7 days ahead, weeks, months, years ahead. And so I very well versed in understanding that. But for some reason, I never applied that to myself on a
Totally.
consistent basis. So yeah, it's definitely it's not to make too many parallels between marketing and taking care of yourself, but it's
They're
a
there. It's real.
balancing. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Um, so I do also want to ask you, is there anything like you wish we're talking about like past and future and everything, like, is there anything in the past you wish you had known sooner um, about epilepsy, or something you wish you had known to ask a doctor, or information you could have gotten from a doctor sooner, that you feel like could have changed the trajectory of your journey or your approach or your treatment plan?
Yeah, so I mean, I was diagnosed in 2003.
Okay.
Epilepsy, there's been advancements on a yearly, if not monthly basis, because of the technology they can use to study it, because of new treatment options, et cetera, et cetera. And like I said, when I was first diagnosed, I had a certain amount of Bravo. I think most 17-year-old people would.
Well, I
But
think you hear that a lot around that age, even when people who were diagnosed at like 3, but it's like the late teen, early 20 years. So many people will share their stories and talk about like you referred to it as the naivete or possibly rebellion, or it just seems like that's a
right.
very, it makes sense given the age. Like it's kind of like, yeah, that's, everyone's doing that.
I didn't even stop and look for an organization about it. I didn't stop to study the general epilepsy world. It wasn't um when I met with my second neurologist who was at my university, I did everything to keep our communication short and sweet. And
Mhm.
it wasn't until it was actually I can't remember the year off the top of my head. I think it was about 2015. I live in Santa Barbara, fortunately, and unfortunately, we become a lake in the summer because the beautiful Channel Islands block all the south swell. And to keep myself in shape for bigger waves, to keep myself in the ocean, my
Mhm.
beautiful home, second home, I'd started doing a lot of prone paddling. And again, I work in marketing, and Facebook Live had just came out, and my manager at the time had assigned me to look into it, think of ideas about it, etc. And I was on this beautiful paddle one morning. Just, we live, as much as it's a lake, and that gets to me at times. It's a gorgeous lake at
I
that. And
believe you.
I was out on the water and just looking around and thinking how few people do this. And I was like, I should try to bring this to more people. And maybe I can tell my manager, hey, I should do a Facebook Live while doing a long distance paddle. And then I stopped and I thought about it further. Like, he'd probably ask me what would be the reason or cause for that. And
Sure.
I was working at Patagonia at the time, and we're all about activism and empowerment in many different ways. And I stopped and I was like, well, maybe I'll make it an epilepsy paddle. I'll say, hey, we need to, raise money for some epilepsy organization or something like that. And I finished. I was immediately like, all right, I'm going to turn around, get back to my office, get in there and propose this idea to my manager, but I'll also have to look it up. And as I turn around, a beautiful pod of dolphins joined me. We were together for so long. They were right next to my board. I was thinking they were about to knock me off.
Oh my
And
God.
I'll always remember that so vividly. It's not the only time
Wow.
I've been close to them, but it was one of the most amazing moments of my life.
What a
And
moment. Yeah. I mean, that's just wow. You don't
it
hear
was
about that often.
it
Like
was
I
so
was just going next to dolphins and
yeah,
BD. That's
talk about
awesome.
like
That's
that. I guess
beautiful.
that's my other team in a way. But I went in and I immediately Googled epilepsy organizations, and the Epilepsy Foundation of Los Angeles, at the time named End Epilepsy. I found them. I called them. They didn't answer the phone. I left a long message saying, "Hey, I have epilepsy. I've done some talking about it, but I'd love to do a Facebook live stream paddle and raise money for you all." And I understand in general people say don't surf or spend time in the ocean with epilepsy, and I do it often alone. So you probably might say no, and I completely understand. Is there a way we could collaborate? And this great man named Nathan Jones, a dear friend of mine to this day,
Oh,
immediately called me back and said, "This is one of my favorite ideas of all time. Let's do
ah,
this. When can we do it?" And um, while I worked with them on creating the plan and communication ideas, that's when I learned for the first time. This is 2015. I'd been diagnosed 12 years prior.
mm,
1 in 13 have epilepsy. 1 in 26 will have a seizure in America. And all of a sudden, I stopped and I thought, I'm not in this alone. There's so many like
ah,
me out there.
yeah.
I think if I'd known that in 2003, maybe I would have been more communicative about it. Maybe I wouldn't have felt like such a 1 in 100 or um,
Totally. Well, it
and a
can be so isolating. It can be a super
exactly,
isolating condition. Yeah, I
exactly.
feel that. And for
So
what it's
even
worth,
just
I
that,
was only diagnosed 5 years ago, and I've only recently started to get involved with the local with Epilepsy Foundation of Greater Chicago. So, and I don't have the excuse of being a teenager, or being a young person. It just took, sometimes I think it just takes a while to for it to settle in to not just your body, but your mental space and your being.
100.
And I think that's so cool. Like I relate to that so hard when you're like, I went to the epilepsy walk this recently, and in Chicago, it's the first time I'd ever gone with epilepsy. I'd been there twice before because it runs in my family, but I'd never gone having epilepsy. And I was very nervous to go because it's like, oh my gosh, this is for my thing. This is my disability is the whole thing reason we're here. And it was just like all of my fears were immediately dissipated the moment I walked up, just because it was such a community right away. It was just people, and I don't know who I don't know if I'm talking to who has epilepsy. I don't know if they love someone with epilepsy because but we're just talking and we're just people. And I that resonates so much with me, the feeling of just like the relief of having community and being like, okay, I'm not in this alone. There's other
Right.
people too.
It's yeah, and it creates a team of a sort. It creates empowerment of a
Yeah,
sort. Um,
totally.
I've been to those walks too, and I've cried my eyes out while at them. I've
Mm-hmm.
turned away from seizures that were happening for fear it might trigger one for me or things of that nature. But um, yeah, I would definitely say, and it's not a go Google it, but if you have a local foundation, or you can reach out to the national foundation to find a support network, to find um, information that you would have never thought of before. And
Absolutely. So we're gonna start wrapping up. I've got two more questions that I gotta ask you. First one is, as I mentioned earlier, and as you know, zero seizures means something different to everyone. And I would like to know what that means to you, Jared.
yeah, so for me, it's going to be a long process. That's again, it's based on how the epilepsy affects you, what type of seizures you have, what treatment plan you might have. But I would say number one, it really begins with your communication path. SK Life Science recently put together a great communication plan
Yes.
organizer on how to go talk to your doctor about it. The Epilepsy Foundation has support groups that differ by the location on the timing, but some of the support groups are just for the loved ones. Some of the support groups are for
Mm-hmm.
those with epilepsy. So it's a combination of communication and education. Um, Find a good neurologist who you feel open to communicate with as much as
Totally.
possible. Make friends with your pharmacists. You
Yes.
know, there's going to be times
Absolutely.
they're going to have to go the extra yard for you, and you're going to
Mm-hmm.
have to maybe you're going to get frustrated, and you're going to need to, you might take out anger on them, or you're going to just have to like, sorry, hey, I'm just stressed, and I need this on time. And maybe it's again the therapist to find someone to have that personal stress release zone or support
Yep.
mechanism, right? Like I've talked with mine about that many times, and he does a wonderful job in helping decompress and perspective, or reset the perspective of how that all works, and helps. Doesn't make it not stressful every time, but it does provide a certain support beam that hadn't been there prior.
Absolutely. I love that. It's like communication and team. Like those two tenets seem to be reoccurring themes, and I love both of them, and we'll be taking them with me and putting them in my arsenal.
Yeah, and on that note, I would say follow me on Instagram, or my contact info on SK Life Science website. Like I'm here to be reached out to. I'm here whether you're the parent or the brother, or the sister, or the person with epilepsy. Finding someone who lives in similar circumstances
Mm.
that goes a long way for that community feel, but also for those types of conversations, making it a personal, because it's so personal and so different amongst us all.
Yes,
There's
totally.
ways to talk through it that find different measures. When I was on my way to brain surgery, I found a couple people who had brain surgery prior, and someone who was going to have it the same week as me. And I
Wow.
would, we do get our waves out here, and I've worked with um, other teams and other people. Most of the people that reach out to me on social media are a surfer who was recently diagnosed, or the mom of a surfer who was recently diagnosed. And we go
Mm.
through lengthy conversations about the safest way to approach it. And I always start it with trying to learn the most about their personal case, and thus provide safety recommendations in different ways. Some people, they should have a life vest on every time they get into the water. Some people should always go with a friend every time they get into the
Mhm.
water, and surf only where there's lifeguards on attendance, etc.
Mhm.
So it's different for everyone. And again, back to my naivete or bravado, I haven't held myself to the safest of standards. I surf big waves, and I often go surfing on my own where there's going to be people, and I'm well known enough in the 805 community where everyone will recognize me, and they've seen me talk about it at some point or another on my social media. And so I do feel relatively safe, but it would be a joke to say it's the safest approach possible to be like myself, who wakes up at 4:30, does my yoga and preparation, makes the coffee for my wife, leaves a note for my child, and then
Oh.
goes and surfs for an hour and a half to 2 hours before I start my long work day that always ends with a bike ride to pick up from daycare, and an hour plus of batting practice to train for the first round of the draft, all that. But
He's on his
again,
way for sure.
that's what I consider it to be part of my treatment plan. I may be a year and a half removed from my last seizure, and because of the surgery, that they deemed it 70 to 90% likely that I'll never have a seizure again. And obviously, I kind of broke that. But if I want to keep my level mind, if I want to keep my body healthy, I'm not going to be someone who spends time on a bike or on at a fitness gym. Surfing is a great workout in its way, and so that's how I'm going to keep myself healthy, both physically and mentally. So
Mhm.
that's my decision, and my wife supports it, my friends support it, et cetera, et cetera.
And I think again, just kind of circles back to that balancing act, of figuring out how you can live safely, but how you can live. The safest way to live is in bubble wrap in your house and you never leave, right? But that's not living. So
Exactly.
um, I think it's just really, again, just really cool how open you are about not only your epilepsy, but then, the things that you need to do to live a fulfilled life. And, I think just the importance of sharing that with your doctor is just huge. It's just huge. And Jared, I have to tell you, I am just so inspired by this conversation. I feel like you and I could talk forever. um, and I just want to say thank you so much for being a part of the third episode of Honest Conversations. And also just want to give another shout out and thank you to SK Life Science and the Epilepsy Foundation of America for hosting this. As Jared mentioned, if you are looking for resources, please go to stepstowardszero.com. There's a great guide on to prepare you for how to walk into doctor's appointments and bring that anecdotal, the passions, as well as your seizure goals into your appointments. Also, there is the Epilepsy Foundation has a helpline that's available 24/7. If you would like to access it, go to epilepsy.com/helpline, and there's a phone number. You can also email too if you're more comfortable sharing that way. We'd also love to hear your stories. because, you know, as Jared mentioned, when we share our stories and when we can connect to someone else, it helps other people feel more alone. And this is like a no pressure ask, because I feel like some people get embarrassed that they don't share their story, and there's nothing to be embarrassed about. But if you feel so compelled, we'd love to hear what zero seizures means to you. You can share, you know, on any of the social channels with hashtag steps towards zero. Jared, thank you, thank you, thank you again so much. This has been so wonderful. And bye, everyone. We'll see you next time.